There is a peculiar stillness that settles over the world just before you feel it. Perhaps you know the moment. The air grows heavier, the shadows deepen imperceptibly, and somewhere at the base of your skull a gentle prickling begins. You are reading, perhaps, or walking alone down a corridor bathed in twilight's amber glow. The house sighs around you with its familiar creaks. A candle gutters in its holder. And then, unbidden, comes the certainty. Someone is watching. You turn, of course. We always turn. The doorway stands empty. The window reflects only your own questioning face against the gathering dark. The corner reveals nothing but dust motes suspended in the last slant of evening light. And yet the feeling lingers, that ancient whisper threading through your nerves, that soft insistence that you are not entirely alone. This sensation, so universal that it spans continents and centuries, so intimate that it lives in your very bones, has haunted humanity since we first gathered around flickering fires and peered into the darkness beyond their glow. 94% of us, some say, have felt these invisible eyes upon our skin. But whose gaze finds us in these solitary moments? What ancient knowing stirs within us when no watcher can be found? Come, let us wander together through the twilight, places where science and spirit intertwine. Let us sit with the mystery a while, and ask what it means that we feel ourselves beheld, even when we stand utterly alone. But before that, comment down below which country you are watching from. In the winter of 1898, within the venerable halls of Cornell University, a young professor named Edward Titchener sat listening to his students confess something rather peculiar. They came to him year after year, these bright-eyed scholars of the mind, speaking of a sensation they could not quite explain. They believed, with quiet conviction, that they could feel when someone stared at the back of their neck. More than that, some claimed they could make another person turn around simply by fixing their gaze upon that vulnerable curve where hairline meets collar. The feeling, they said, was uncanny, a gathering of unpleasant tension at the nape, sometimes accompanied by a tingling that would swell and insist until turning became inevitable, a compulsion they could not resist. One might be seated in a lecture hall, in a church pew, in a crowded public gathering, and suddenly know with crystalline certainty that unseen eyes had found them. Titchener, a man devoted to the nascent science of the mind, was skeptical. He did not believe in telepathy or forces that traveled invisibly from one consciousness to another. And yet the universality of this experience intrigued him. So many people across so many circumstances reporting the same peculiar sensation. Surely there must be an explanation rooted in the workings of the mind itself. He conducted experiments, asking his students to stare intently at the backs of their classmates' necks, then to look away, while the unwitting subjects recorded whether they felt watched. The results, Titchener reported, were invariably negative. Pure chance, nothing more. The belief, he concluded, was a superstition, albeit one with deep roots in human consciousness. But something in his explanation catches our attention still, over a century later. He described how, if one simply thinks intently about one's own knee or foot or the small of one's back, a surprisingly insistent mass of sensations will arise there, tinglings and pressures of which one was previously quite unaware. The expectation of being watched, he suggested, might create the very feeling it anticipated. We conjure the gaze ourselves, and yet the phenomenon did not vanish with his pronouncement. 15 years later, in 1913, another researcher surveyed his students and found that more than 2/3 of them firmly believed they had experienced this uncanny feeling. The sensation, it seemed, was too embedded in human experience to be dismissed by laboratory findings alone. This is where our story properly begins, not with answers, but with this ancient and enduring question. For the feeling of being watched is older than psychology, older than science, older perhaps than language itself. It lives in the marrow of our species, a whisper from the deep past that we have never quite managed to silence. Long before Titchener's students shuffled into his Cornell classroom, long before the word psychology had even been coined, our ancestors knew this feeling intimately. In the forests and savannas where humanity took its first tentative steps, to sense when you were being watched was no mere superstition, it was survival itself. The rustle in the tall grass might be wind, or it might be a predator preparing to spring. The gleam in the underbrush might be dewdrops on leaves, or it might be eyes tracking your every movement. Those who felt the gaze and turned to face it lived to see another dawn. Those who dismissed the whisper at their neck became prey. Over countless generations, this sensitivity wove itself into the very fabric of our nervous system, until detecting attention became as natural as breathing, as automatic as the quickening of our pulse when danger draws near. Scientists today speak of something called the gaze detection system, a complex network within the human brain that appears to be devoted entirely to discerning when we are being looked at. Specialized neurons, first observed in the brains of macaque monkeys, fire specifically when another creature's eyes are directed upon them. Newborns only days old will prefer faces that gaze directly at them over those that look away, suggesting that this awareness may be wired into us from birth, an inheritance from ancestors we will never know. Our eyes themselves bear witness to this ancient bargain. Unlike nearly every other creature on Earth, humans possess a large white sclera surrounding our irises, that distinctive ring of white that makes it so easy to see exactly where someone else is looking. Most animals have evolved dark sclera, which hides the direction of their gaze from predators and prey alike, but humans took a different path. We evolved eyes designed to be read, to communicate, to connect. In making our gaze visible, we made others' gazes visible to us, creating a species uniquely attuned to the direction of attention. This is why researchers now believe we can sense when someone on a train is looking at us without turning our heads to check. Our peripheral vision, though it cannot resolve fine details, remains exquisitely sensitive to that particular pattern. The gleam of white surrounding a darker center, oriented in our direction. We detect it without knowing we detect it, respond to it before conscious thought can intervene. But what of those moments when no watcher is there at all? What of the empty room, the deserted corridor, the solitary walk beneath a canopy of stars? Why do we still feel observed when observation is impossible? Here, the researchers tell us something remarkable. When we cannot determine whether or not we are being watched, when the evidence is ambiguous, when the shadows are deep, when another person wears dark sunglasses that hide their eyes, our brains default to assuming that we are the target of attention. A direct gaze, after all, can signal either threat or opportunity, dominance or connection. The cost of missing such a signal was, in our ancestral past, potentially fatal, and so our minds evolved to err on the side of caution, to assume the gaze even when we cannot prove it. This is what some call the hypervigilance bias, the brain's tendency, when uncertain, to imagine itself observed. It is not paranoia, exactly, but rather a kind of ancient wisdom encoded in our neurons, a fail-safe mechanism designed to keep us alert. Perhaps in this light, the feeling of being watched is not an error at all, but an echo of all those countless ancestors who felt it, turned, and survived. But this biological explanation, elegant as it may be, does not quite capture the full texture of the experience. For when we feel ourselves watched in an empty room, we do not merely feel alert. We feel present in a way that is difficult to articulate, acknowledged, perceived, held in the awareness of something beyond ourselves. There is a quality to the sensation that seems to reach past the merely neurological, into territories that science has not yet mapped, and this is where the story begins to deepen, to branch into stranger territories than Titchener could have imagined. For across the globe, in cultures separated by oceans and millennia, people have named this feeling, honored it, feared it, and woven it into the fabric of their spiritual understanding. The gaze that finds us in our solitude has worn many faces, spoken in many tongues. Some have called it benevolent, others have named it a curse. But everywhere, it seems, humanity has recognized that to be watched is to be touched by something larger than ourselves. And perhaps, before we journey into those twilight territories where folklore and faith hold sway, we might pause to wonder, what does it mean that we can feel seen without a seer? What does it tell us about the nature of consciousness, of attention, of the invisible threads that seem to bind us to the world and to each other? For now let the question settle like dusk over a quiet garden. The hour grows late, and there is much further to wander before we rest. Somewhere in the highlands of Madagascar, as the first stars begin to pierce the velvet sky, a family prepares for Famadana. They will open the ancient stone tomb where their ancestors rest, unwrap the silk shrouds that embrace the bones, and wrap them fresh in new cloth, dancing with the beloved dead beneath the watching moon. For the Malagasy people, the departed are never truly gone. They remain present, observant, their attention a blessing upon the living who honor them. This belief, that the dead continue to watch over us, threads through human civilization like a river through bedrock, carving channels in culture after culture, era after era. It is perhaps the oldest and most widespread interpretation of that strange sensation we carry in our bones, the feeling that unseen eyes observe our passage through the world. In China, for more than 3,000 years, families have maintained ancestral altars in their homes, placing offerings of food and incense before spirit tablets bearing the names of those who came before. The ancestors, it is believed, maintain a keen interest in the fortunes of their descendants. They observe, they judge, they bless or withhold blessing depending on whether proper respect has been shown. To neglect the dead is to invite their displeasure. To honor them is to draw upon their accumulated wisdom and protection. The altar in this tradition is not merely symbolic. It functions as a kind of window between worlds, a place where the gaze of the departed can meet the prayers of the living. When a family gathers before it, they are not simply remembering, they are being remembered in return, held in the awareness of those who loved them before the veil of death fell between. In the Yoruba traditions of West Africa, the ancestors are called upon through elaborate masquerades, known as egungun. Costumed dancers embody the spirits of the dead, moving through the community with an otherworldly grace, their faces hidden behind carved masks and layers of richly textured cloth. When the egungun appear, the ancestors are believed to be present, watching through those stylized eyes, blessing the living, warning of dangers to come. The Zulu people of South Africa hold that ancestral spirits reside within the very landscape itself, in the rocks, the trees, the rivers that flow through their homeland. These spirits, it is said, can communicate with the living, offering guidance and protection. When one feels watched in a sacred grove or beside an ancient stone, it is not fancy but recognition. The ancestors are there, attentive, keeping faith with those who will one day join them. Among the Lakota Sioux of North America, the spirits of the departed are understood as guides who watch over their descendants, particularly during times of transition. When a young person stands at the threshold of adulthood, when a hunter prepares to face the wilderness, when a family gathers to mark a loss or a birth, the ancestors draw near. Their gaze is a comfort, a reminder that we walk a path worn smooth by countless feet before our own. The Maori of New Zealand speak of Wakapapa, the intricate web of genealogy that connects each living person to their ancestors and, through them, to the land and the cosmos itself. To know one's Wakapapa is to know oneself as observed, as embedded in a network of watching eyes that stretches back through generations and forward through those yet to come. The feeling of being watched in this light is not alienation but belonging. And in Japan, during the summer festival of Obon, it is believed that ancestral spirits return to the world of the living for a brief sojourn. Lanterns are lit and floated down rivers to guide them home. Traditional dances called bonodori welcome them with rhythm and movement. For those few days, the boundary between worlds grows thin as paper, and the living may feel themselves observed by beloved faces they thought lost to time. What are we to make of this remarkable convergence? Across continents, across religions, across the vast gulfs of language and custom, human beings have arrived at the same conclusion: we are watched by those who came before. The details differ, the altars, the masks, the dances, the offerings, but the core intuition remains consistent. When we feel eyes upon us in our solitude, the ancestors are near. Perhaps this belief arose because the feeling itself demanded explanation. Our nervous systems, shaped by millions of years of evolution, produced this sensation of being observed, and our storytelling minds sought to name the observer. Who else but our beloved dead? who knew us in life and surely must care for us still. The gaze we feel becomes proof of their continued existence, their undying love, their watchful presence in an uncertain world. Or perhaps, and here we must let the mystery breathe, as our instructions tell us, something more is at work. Perhaps the feeling and the belief arose together because both respond to something true, something that our ancestors understood in ways we have partially forgotten. Perhaps attention itself is a force that persists, that lingers, that continues to touch us from beyond the threshold of death. The Roman household honored the laudes and penates, protective spirits of the home, guardians of the hearth and the family's fortune. These spirits were not the dead exactly, but something adjacent, presences that accumulated in a place over time, watching over those who dwelt there. Offerings were left at small shrines, prayers were spoken in hushed voices. The feeling of being watched in such a home was reassurance rather than threat. In Hindu tradition, the concept of Pitru Paksha sets aside a fortnight each year specifically for honoring the ancestors. During this time, rituals called Shraddha are performed in which food is offered to the departed with the belief that it nourishes them in the afterlife. To fail in this duty is to invite misfortune, for the ancestors remain attentive to how they are treated, and their watching gaze can bring blessing or blight depending on the devotion shown. The Filipino concept of Anito encompasses the spirits of ancestors who serve as guardians and caretakers. Umalagad, the word means one who watches over. These spirits are believed to inhabit particular places, to observe the conduct of the living, to intercede with higher powers on behalf of their descendants. The feeling of being watched, in this understanding, is the touch of ancient love reaching across the boundary of worlds. Even in the supposedly secular West, traces of these beliefs persist. We visit cemeteries and speak to the dead. We keep photographs of departed loved ones in places of honor. We sense their presence on anniversaries, at weddings, at births, the feeling that they are near, watching, somehow aware of these moments in our lives that they would have cherished to witness. And who can say with certainty that they are not? Science has its explanations for the neural substrates of gaze detection, the evolutionary advantages of hypervigilance, the tricks our minds play in conditions of uncertainty. But science also reminds us again and again how much remains unknown, how the mechanisms of consciousness itself remain shrouded in mystery. If we can feel watched without a watcher, perhaps we can also feel watched by watchers we cannot see. For now, let us hold both possibilities gently, the biological and the spiritual, the neurological and the numinous. They need not be enemies. Perhaps they are different languages describing the same ineffable reality, different windows looking out upon the same starlit sky. In the cultures we have visited tonight, the ancestors are not feared but welcomed. Their watching gaze is a gift, a sign that we are not alone in the universe, that love persists beyond death, that memory is more than mere recollection, it is a living force that continues to touch us across the years. The next time you feel eyes upon you in an empty room, consider, perhaps it is the amygdala firing in ancient caution, a neural echo of savannas long vanished, or perhaps it is grandmother checking in. Perhaps it is a great-grandfather you never knew, curious about the strange world his descendants now inhabit. Perhaps the feeling is both at once, biology and blessing intertwined, neither complete without the other. The hour deepens around us now. The candle burns lower, but there is more territory to explore. Other traditions that have sought to name the unseen watcher in our midst. Some speak not of loving ancestors but of something more ambivalent, a gaze that can harm as easily as it heals. Let us rest a moment before we venture into those more uncertain territories. The ancestors, if they are watching, will surely understand. There is a color that appears in marketplaces from Istanbul to Athens, from Cairo to Mexico City, a particular shade of blue, sometimes called peacock, sometimes called cerulean, that catches the light with an almost supernatural intensity. It is the color of the Nazar Bonkuk, the Turkish evil eye amulet, and wherever it appears, it carries the same message. Someone's gaze can cause harm, and this talisman stands guard against it. The belief in the evil eye is perhaps the oldest continuous superstition in human history. Archaeologists have unearthed amulets designed to ward it off dating back 5,000 years to the earliest civilizations of Mesopotamia. Clay tablets from ancient Sumeria speak of an eye of death whose glance could wither crops and sicken children. The Egyptians invoked the Eye of Horus, that protective symbol of divine sight, to counter malevolent gazes aimed at the living and the dead alike. For our purposes, what matters is this. Across the ancient world and into the present day, countless cultures have believed that the simple act of looking can cause damage, not through any physical mechanism but through something more subtle: envy transmuted into force, jealousy weaponized through attention, desire curdling into curse. The ancient Greeks called it baskaneia, and they feared it deeply. The Romans knew it as fascinum, from which our word fascinean descends, a reminder that to be held in someone's gaze was once considered dangerous, a kind of enchantment that could bind and harm. Both cultures developed elaborate protections against it. Amulets shaped like eyes to stare back at the starer, obscene gestures meant to distract the malevolent gaze, rituals of purification for those who fell under its shadow. What is the evil eye, precisely? In most traditions, it is believed to operate through envy. When someone looks upon another's good fortune, their beautiful child, their thriving crops, their happiness, their health, with jealousy in their heart, that look carries a kind of poison. The object of their gaze may sicken, fail, wither, or die. The curse requires no words, no ritual, no intention, sometimes not even awareness. A person may cast the evil eye without meaning to, their envy leaking out through their attention like venom from a wound. In Turkey, where the nazar is ubiquitous, appearing on doorways, in cars, dangling from the necks of infants, the belief remains potent. When a nazar cracks or shatters, it is not considered bad luck, but rather proof that it has done its job. It has absorbed a malevolent gaze meant for its owner and given its own substance and protection. The broken amulet must be replaced immediately, lest the owner go unguarded. In Mexico and throughout Latin America, the evil eye is known as mal de ojo, and it is particularly feared in relation to children. Infants are considered especially vulnerable to envious gazes, their good health and beauty a magnet for the jealousy of others. Protective measures abound. Red ribbons tied to wrists, prayers spoken over sleeping babies, rituals of egg cleansing meant to draw out the curse once it has taken hold. The Assyrians wear beads pierced with multiple small holes resembling eyes, a chorus of protective gazes to deflect the singular malevolent one. In parts of India, children's faces are marked with black coal near the eyes or on the forehead, an intentional blemish meant to make them less attractive to envious attention. In Brazil, the mal olhado, or fat eye, is believed to target those who receive insincere compliments. Protection comes through speaking blessings along with praise, neutralizing the potential poison of admiration. What does this widespread belief tell us about the sensation of being watched? Perhaps it confirms what our nervous systems already know, that attention is not neutral. To be observed is to be affected. The gaze carries weight, carries intention, carries something that can shape the one who receives it. Modern psychology speaks of the spotlight effect, our tendency to overestimate how much others notice us, how carefully they observe our appearance and behavior. We feel ourselves watched even when no one particularly cares. But the evil eye tradition suggests something deeper, that the watching itself has consequences, that attention is a kind of touch, and that not all touches are benign. Consider the feeling of being stared at by someone who wishes you ill. There is a quality to that attention that differs from neutral observation, from friendly interest, from loving regard. The body registers it, the skin prickles, something within us recoils. We do not need to see the starer to sense the tenor of their gaze. Perhaps this is merely our ability to read subtle cues of body language and facial expression, or perhaps, and here again we must let the mystery breathe, there is something in attention itself that communicates, that reaches beyond the merely physical. In Jewish tradition, the evil eye is called ayin hara, and protection against it involves a combination of humility and blessing. One should not boast of good fortune, lest jealous attention be attracted. When praise is given, it is customary to say bliayin hara, without the evil eye, a verbal shield against the potential harm of admiration. The hand of Miriam, what Muslims call the hand of Fatima, and most know as the Hamsa, serves as a visual protection, an open palm meant to stop the malevolent gaze in its tracks. The color blue appears again and again in these protective traditions, from Turkey to Greece, from the Mediterranean to South Asia. Blue like the sky, some say, representing truth and divine protection. Blue like water, precious and life-giving in arid lands. Blue as the color that deflects, that absorbs, that neutralizes the harmful energies carried in an envious look. But the evil eye is not always cast with conscious ill will. In many traditions, it can emerge from simple admiration, from the innocent appreciation of beauty or success. The eye that beholds with longing may poison what it desires, not through malice but through the nature of desire itself. This is a humbling teaching, that even our positive attention may carry shadows, that looking itself is never entirely innocent. The feeling of being watched, then, takes on new dimensions. It is not merely the awareness of observation, but the awareness of being affected by that observation. We feel the gaze because the gaze does something to us. It reaches across the space between bodies and touches something within. Whether we call this neurology or magic, projection or perception, the experience remains consistent across cultures and millennia. In some Turkish villages there is a saying, "The eye that envies can crack a stone." Hyperbole, certainly, but also a recognition of the power attributed to directed attention. The evil eye is not merely belief. It is acknowledgement that how others look at us shapes who we are, how we fare, what becomes of us in this uncertain world. Today, the nazar has become a fashion accessory in many parts of the West, worn by people who may know little of its history or meaning. But for those raised in traditions that take the evil eye seriously, this symbol remains potent, a daily reminder that we walk through a world full of gazes, not all of them kind. And perhaps in wearing it, even those who do not consciously believe are acknowledging something their bodies already know, that to be watched is to be vulnerable, that attention has weight, that the eyes that find us in our solitude, whether friend or stranger, living or dead, carry the power to shape our fate. The hour grows late now, and the candle has burned to half its height. We have journeyed from the protective gaze of ancestors to the potentially harmful gaze of the envious. Both share this fundamental insight, that watching is not passive, that observation is a form of engagement, that the feeling we carry in our bones when invisible eyes seem to find us is a recognition of something real. But there are other watchers still to consider. Those that dwell neither in ancestral realms nor in envious hearts, but in the twilight spaces between one thing and another. Let us rest our eyes a moment before we turn to meet them. In the countryside of northern Japan, in the region of Iwate where winter lingers long and the old wooden farmhouses creak with memories, there is said to dwell a spirit known as the Zashiki Warashi. This is no malevolent ghost, no hungry demon from Buddhist hell scrolls. It is the spirit of a child, mischievous but benevolent, who attaches itself to households and brings them fortune. You may not see the Zashiki Warashi, the old ones say, but you can feel its presence. You might hear soft footsteps in an empty room, glimpse movement at the corner of your eye, sense something watching you as you go about your daily tasks. Homes where the Zashiki Warashi dwells prosper. Businesses flourish, children grow healthy, the family line continues strong. But should the spirit depart, should the household fall into disrepair, or its inhabitants fail to maintain the proper atmosphere of warmth and welcome, fortune leaves with it. Travelers once sought out inns rumored to house a Shaki Warashi, hoping to catch a glimpse of the childlike specter and carry some of its luck away with them. This is the territory we enter now. The realm of spirits that are neither fully of the living nor of the dead, beings that exist in the liminal spaces where the feeling of being watched takes on forms more strange and varied than ancestral protection or envious curse. The Japanese language has a word that captures something essential about this feeling, kehai. It is difficult to translate precisely. presence perhaps, or atmosphere, or the sense that something significant is about to occur. The legendary manga artist Shigeru Mizuki, who spent his life giving form to the supernatural creatures of Japanese folklore, spoke often of Keihai as the gateway to the ghostly world. A ghost does not simply appear out of nowhere, he explained. Its arrival is always preceded by Keihai, a feeling of eeriness, a charge in the air, the unmistakable sense that something just beyond the veil of ordinary perception is drawing near. One spirit in particular embodies this, the Buruburu, whose name literally means the shivers. Its task in the cosmology of yokai, those supernatural beings that populate Japanese folklore, is to create the feeling of cold at the back of one's neck when one visits a cemetery or enters a place where the dead linger. The Buruburu announces the approach of other spirits, heralding their arrival with that familiar prickling sensation that says you are not alone. This is Keihai made manifest, the feeling before the form, the sensation before the sighting. In this understanding, the experience of being watched is not an illusion or an error, but a perception of something real, something that exists just beyond the threshold of ordinary awareness, announcing itself through the body's ancient knowing. The world of yokai is vast and strange, populated by creatures that explain every manner of uncanny experience. The Taka-ana is said to stretch her body to impossible heights in order to peer through windows, observing those inside with an intensity that makes the watched feel certain they are seen, even when they cannot see the watcher. The Hyakume, the hundred-eyed spirit, patrols shadowy places, abandoned temples, ancient graveyards, forgotten shrines, its body covered with vigilant eyes that watch ceaselessly for intruders and malefactors. These are not simply stories told to frighten children, though they can certainly do that. They are attempts to name and understand the feeling that haunted places carry, the sense that something watches from the darkness, that attention flows toward us from sources we cannot identify. By giving form to the formless, by painting faces on the sensation of being observed, the artists and storytellers of Japan created a vocabulary for experiences that otherwise resist description. In many cultures, spirits are understood to inhabit particular places, accumulating like sediment over time. The Roman lares lingered at crossroads and in household shrines. The Philippine Dewata dwelt in ancient trees, protective of their groves and watchful of those who entered. The jinn of Islamic tradition inhabit ruins and wilderness places, observing human travelers with intentions that may be benevolent, malevolent, or simply curious. What these traditions share is the sense that the feeling of being watched has a geography, that certain places are thick with attention, heavy with the accumulated gazes of beings unseen. A forest that has stood for centuries may feel different from a recently cleared field. A building where many have lived and died may carry a quality distinct from new construction. The watching we feel is not random but located, not uniform but specific to the spaces through which we move. This is why so many traditions speak of spirits attached to place. The Aikiryo of Japan, a living ghost that can leave the body while its owner still breathes, is often tied to locations of strong emotion, places of love or jealousy, longing or grief. The spirit wanders, watching, unable to let go of its attachments. Those who pass through such places may feel observed by eyes they cannot see, touched by attention they cannot explain. In European folklore, the familiar spirit served a similar function, though with darker connotations during the witch trial era. These entities, sometimes appearing as animals, sometimes as humanoid forms, were believed to assist those who practiced magic, providing knowledge and power in exchange for service. They watched over their human companions, guarding and guiding, their attention a constant presence that the witch or cunning folk could feel, even when the familiar could not be seen. The familiar might take the form of a black cat curled in a corner, a toad resting near a doorway, a bird that appeared with suspicious regularity, but its true nature was invisible, spiritual, a watcher that existed in the space between the material and the immaterial. To sense its presence was to feel watched by something both intimate and strange, a companion that dwelt in twilight territories where ordinary categories did not apply. Even in traditions that emphasize a single divine being, the sense of being watched by invisible agents persists. Guardian angels in Christian and Islamic thought observe their charges constantly, recording good deeds and failures, offering protection against harm. The feeling of being watched in this context becomes a reminder of divine attention mediated through angelic eyes, a benevolent surveillance meant to keep us safe and true. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century mystic, wrote of angels as pure intention, pure awareness directed toward the divine and reflected back toward humanity. To feel watched by such beings was to feel oneself lifted into the orbit of the sacred, observed not with envy or malice but with patient, luminous attention that desired only one's flourishing. And so we find ourselves in a world densely populated with watchers, ancestral spirits maintaining their connection to the living, envious eyes casting shadows on good fortune, place-bound entities observing those who enter their domains, guardian presences hovering at the edges of perception. The feeling of being watched, which modern science would locate entirely within our neural architecture, becomes in these traditions a point of contact with realities that extend far beyond the individual brain. Perhaps both perspectives hold truth. Perhaps our nervous systems evolved to detect attention because attention is real, because something watches, because the universe is not empty space through which we move unobserved, but rather a web of awareness in which we are always, already, held in the gaze of something larger than ourselves. The candle gutters now, casting dancing shadows on the walls around us. The hour has grown very late indeed. But there is one more territory we must visit before we can rest, a place where the modern and the ancient meet, where science begins to speak in terms the old storytellers might have recognized. Let us gather our courage and venture one step further into the mystery. In a hospital in Geneva, a physician named T.N. sat in a darkened room, staring at what his conscious mind told him was absolute blackness. 2 strokes had destroyed his visual cortex, leaving him completely blind, not because his eyes had failed, but because the part of his brain that transforms light into sight no longer functioned. He could see nothing. He knew he could see nothing. And yet, when researchers showed him photographs of faces, some with eyes gazing directly at him and others with eyes turned away, something remarkable happened. His amygdala, that almond-shaped structure deep within the brain that processes threat and emotion, responded differently to the 2 types of images. Though T.N. could not consciously see the photographs at all, though he experienced only darkness, his brain distinguished between eyes that looked at him and eyes that looked elsewhere. Something beneath his awareness was detecting the gaze. This phenomenon, which researchers call blindsight, has profound implications for our understanding of the feeling of being watched. It suggests that our brains process far more visual information than reaches conscious awareness, and that gaze detection may be one of the most deeply wired of all our perceptual systems. Even without the capacity for conscious sight, the human brain can sense when it is observed. The pathway responsible for this appears to bypass the visual cortex entirely. Information from the eyes travels through more ancient neural structures, the superior colliculus, the pulvinar, the amygdala, that evolved long before conscious vision emerged. These are the parts of the brain that fire in response to threat, to emotional significance, to stimuli that matter for survival, and they register direct gaze as something that matters enormously. Scientists call this an evolutionary failsafe. Even if the higher visual centers are damaged or overwhelmed, even if conscious perception is impaired, the brain maintains a fast, unconscious channel for detecting when another creature's eyes are aimed in our direction. We feel watched because, on some level below thought, we are detecting watching. This discovery illuminates the universality of the experience. The feeling of being observed is not merely cultural, not merely psychological, not merely learned. It is wired into the very architecture of our brains, operating through pathways so old that they predate our species, our genus, perhaps even the emergence of mammals. We inherit it from ancestors whose survival depended on knowing when a predator's gaze had found them in the tall grass. But what are we to make of this knowledge? Does it explain away the mystery, reducing the feeling of invisible eyes to mere neural machinery? Or does it deepen the mystery, revealing that our brains are exquisitely tuned to something real, something that, in those ancestral days, was always there when we felt it? The researchers who study gaze detection speak of our species' unusual eyes, the large white sclera that makes it so easy to track the direction of attention, the specialized neurons that fire specifically in response to direct gaze, the widespread neural network devoted to processing where others are looking. We evolved, it seems, not just to see but to see seeing, not just to look but to know when we are looked upon. And here is where the scientific and the spiritual begin to converge. For what these findings suggest is that attention itself has a kind of reality, that the direction of someone's gaze is a meaningful fact in the world, something our brains evolved to detect because it mattered, because it shaped our survival, because it was there. The experience of feeling watched, then, may not be illusion but perception, perception of something our conscious minds cannot always identify, but which our deeper neural systems register nonetheless. We feel what we cannot see, because seeing is not the only way of knowing. The body knows before the mind. The ancient parts of the brain know before the conscious self. This is what the Japanese concept of kihai points toward, the sense of presence before the sighting, the feeling that something significant is near. Science now tells us that this feeling has a neurological basis, that specialized brain systems created in response to cues we process without awareness. But this explanation does not diminish the experience. It explains why the experience is so universal, so ancient, so deeply embedded in what it means to be human. Consider again the person who feels watched in an empty room. Their amygdala may be responding to shadows that suggest form, to sounds that hint at movement, to the particular quality of silence that fills a space where no one is, but where someone could be. The brain, erring on the side of caution, generates the feeling of being observed because the cost of being wrong in one direction is inconvenience, while the cost of being wrong in the other direction was, for our ancestors, death. And consider the person who feels watched in a sacred space, a temple, a cemetery, an ancestral grove. Here the cues may be different. The accumulated associations of the place, the knowledge that others have prayed and wept and died here, the cultural framing that prepares the mind to perceive presence, the amygdala responds to meaning as well as threat, to significance as well as danger. The feeling of being watched in such places may arise from the convergence of neural sensitivity and cultural expectation, biology and belief intertwined. But we should be careful not to reduce one to the other. The fact that we can identify neural substrates for the feeling of being watched does not prove that the feeling has no object beyond the neurons. After all, we can identify neural substrates for the perception of color, but no one concludes from this that color is merely neurological, that the wavelengths of light we perceive have no reality outside our brains. Perhaps the feeling of being watched is similar, a perception of something real, channeled through neural mechanisms that evolved precisely to detect it. What would it mean if attention itself were somehow substantial, somehow capable of crossing the space between minds? The mystics of many traditions have believed exactly this. They speak of thought forms, of astral bodies, of subtle energies that travel from one consciousness to another. Modern science offers no evidence for such ideas, but science also offers no complete explanation for consciousness itself, for how the subjective experience of being aware arises from the activity of neurons. We stand at the edge of vast unknowns, peering into darkness that our current tools cannot illuminate. For now, perhaps we can hold both truths, that the brain generates the feeling of being watched through ancient neural pathways, and that this feeling may sometimes reflect something real, something in the quality of attention directed toward us, something in the accumulated presence of a place, something in the lingering awareness of those who loved us and passed beyond the veil of death. The blindsight studies tell us that we perceive more than we know, that consciousness is only the tip of a vast iceberg of neural processing. Perhaps the feeling of being watched is a message from those deeper waters, a signal from parts of ourselves that remain in contact with realities we cannot consciously apprehend. The body knows, the ancient brain knows, and what it knows is this: we are beheld. The candle has burned quite low now, its flame a small, brave thing against the encroaching dark. One chapter remains to us, a gentle closing, a return to the present moment where you and I sit together in the mystery of awareness, of attention, of the invisible threads that bind us to each other, and to all who have watched and wondered before us. And so we arrive at the end of our wandering, though perhaps it is more a pause than a conclusion. The mystery of why we feel watched when no one is there does not resolve neatly into a single answer. It branches and meanders like a river delta, offering many channels but no single destination. This, perhaps, is as it should be. We have traced the feeling from the lecture halls of 19th century Cornell to the neuroimaging suites of modern hospitals, from the ancestral altars of China to the evil eye markets of Istanbul, from the Keihai of Japanese folklore to the blind side of those who see without seeing. Everywhere we have looked, we have found people grappling with the same uncanny sensation, the prickling at the nape of the neck, the certainty that eyes are upon us, the weight of attention we cannot identify or explain. Some have called this feeling superstition, a trick of the mind, an evolutionary artifact that persists though its purpose has passed. Others have called it proof of the spirit world, evidence that we are never truly alone, that the dead watch over us and unseen beings populate the twilight territories of existence. Both interpretations have their logic, their evidence, their adherence. Neither can claim final victory over the other. Perhaps the most honest response is to hold the question open, to let the mystery continue to breathe, for there is something valuable in not knowing, something important about acknowledging the limits of our understanding. The feeling of being watched reminds us that we do not fully comprehend our own experience, that consciousness remains in many ways opaque to itself, that the relationship between the brain and the world it perceives is stranger and more subtle than any simple account can capture. Consider what it means to be watched, truly watched, by someone who attends to you with focused awareness. You are no longer anonymous, no longer lost in the background. You become, for that moment, the center of someone else's world. You exist for them in a way that you did not before. Their attention lifts you out of the stream of undifferentiated experience and makes you singular, specific, real. Perhaps this is why the feeling of being watched is so persistent, so universal, so deeply affecting. It speaks to our need to be seen, to be known, to be held in the awareness of others. We are social creatures to our core, wired for connection, starving for attention from the moment we emerge crying into the light. To feel watched is, in some sense, to feel alive, to feel that our existence registers, that our presence matters, that we are not merely shadows flickering across an empty stage. The infant gazes at the mother's face, seeking the eyes that recognize her. The lover watches the beloved, tracing every movement with an attention that is also a kind of touch. The dying person looks to those gathered around the bed, seeking the comfort of known faces, the reassurance that they are not passing into oblivion unobserved. We crave the gaze. We need to be watched, and perhaps the feeling that invisible eyes observe us is, at bottom, an expression of that need, a wish that becomes so strong it generates its own sensory reality. But wishes do not explain everything. The brain's gaze detection system did not evolve to fulfill emotional needs, but to solve practical problems of survival. The ancestors watch, the evil eye threatens, the spirits of place observe. These beliefs arose not from wishful thinking, but from attempts to explain an experience that demanded explanation. Something is happening when we feel watched. The question is what? And here, in these final moments of our journey together, perhaps we can venture a tentative synthesis. The feeling of being watched is produced by neural systems exquisitely tuned to detect attention. It is shaped by cultural frameworks that give meaning and form to the sensation. It is amplified by emotional needs for connection and recognition. And it may, at times, reflect something real, something in the quality of attention directed toward us, something in the accumulated presence of a place, something in the persistent love of those who knew us and departed. All of these are true. None of them is the whole truth. The experience of being watched exists at the intersection of biology and culture, of brain and soul, of the measurable and the mysterious. To reduce it to any single explanation is to lose something essential about its richness, its depth, its enduring power. The next time the feeling comes, when you are reading alone in a quiet room, or walking down a shadowed street as dusk settles over the city, or sitting by the window in the hour between midnight and dawn, pause before you dismiss it. Let the sensation unfold without interpretation, without judgment. Notice how your body responds. The subtle tightening, the slight turn of the head, the heightened awareness that spreads through you like ripples across still water. Perhaps your amygdala is firing in ancient caution, responding to cues too subtle for conscious recognition. Perhaps the place where you sit carries the residue of countless other presences, the accumulated watching of all who have been there before. Perhaps someone you loved, now gone beyond the reach of sight and sound, maintains a thread of awareness that touches you still. Perhaps all of these are happening at once, layered upon each other like the colors of twilight merging into night. You do not have to choose. You can hold all the possibilities gently, as we have tried to do throughout this wandering. The mystery does not require resolution. It requires only acknowledgement, the recognition that our lives are richer and stranger than any single framework can contain. The surveys tell us that 94% of people have experienced this feeling. 94%. Nearly everyone who has ever lived has known what it is to sense invisible eyes upon them. This is not a fringe experience, not an aberration, not a malfunction. It is as human as breathing, as universal as the need for sleep, as ancient as the fear of the dark, and perhaps it is also as meaningful. Perhaps the feeling of being watched points toward something true about our situation in the cosmos, that we are not isolated beings moving through empty space, but participants in a web of awareness that extends far beyond our individual skulls. The ancestors watch. The spirits attend. The divine, in whatever form we conceive it, holds us in its gaze. And behind all these cultural expressions lies the fundamental reality that consciousness itself is relational, that awareness implies a relationship between watcher and watched, that to exist is to be perceived. The candle has nearly guttered now. Its flame flickers low, casting the last of its wavering light against the walls of the room where we have sat together through these hours of contemplation. Soon it will go out, and darkness will settle in earnest. But the mystery will remain, patient, persistent, as old as humanity, and as fresh as the next time you feel eyes upon your back. May you walk gently through the watching world. May the gazes that find you be mostly benevolent, the loving attention of those who care for you, the protective observation of whatever guardian presences you believe in, the curious regard of the universe as it contemplates itself through your awareness. And when the feeling comes, as it surely will, may you receive it as a gift, a reminder that you are seen, that you are known, that in some mysterious way you are held in the attention of something vast and unfathomable. The feeling of being watched, in the end, is a reminder that we are never truly alone, and perhaps that is the most comforting truth of all. Rest now, the night is deep, and the morning will bring new mysteries to ponder. But for this moment, in this silence, let the watching wash over you, whatever form it takes, whatever source it claims, and know that you are beheld. You have always been beheld, and you always will be. In the old stories, there is always a moment when the protagonist pauses at the threshold, between the familiar world and the unknown, between the daylight realm and the twilight territories, between knowing and mystery. This is such a moment. We have traveled far together through the lands of the watched and the watching. We have met ancestors who linger at the edges of perception, spirits who dwell in places thick with memory, envious eyes that cast shadows on good fortune, and neural systems that evolved over millions of years to detect the direction of attention. We have sat with scientists and mystics, with folklorists and neurologists, with the living and with echoes of the dead, and through it all the feeling has remained, that strange, universal, ineffable sensation of being observed when no observer can be found. It pulses beneath our skins like a second heartbeat, this awareness of awareness, this perception of perception. It connects us to every human who has ever turned suddenly in an empty room, who has paused on a dark path to peer into the shadows, who has felt the weight of invisible eyes, and wondered whose gaze had found them. Perhaps in the end, the feeling of being watched is itself a kind of watching, our consciousness turning back upon itself, sensing its own capacity to be an object of attention in a world full of attention. We feel watched because we are watchers, because we know what it is to observe, and because we understand, on some wordless level, that the same capacity exists in others seen and unseen, living and dead, human and otherwise. The old traditions knew this. They populated the world with beings who watch, not as a failure of critical thinking, but as a recognition that the universe seems designed for observation. The eyes of the ancestors, the vigilance of guardian spirits, the malevolent scrutiny of the envious, the patient attention of the divine, all of these are ways of saying that we live in a world where watching matters, where attention is real, where the direction of someone's gaze can change everything. Modern science has not disproved this intuition, it has merely translated it into a different vocabulary. Specialized neurons fire when we are observed. The amygdala responds to direct gaze with ancient urgency. Our brains overestimate the likelihood that attention is directed toward us because, in the environment where our species evolved, the cost of underestimation was too high. We are watched by our own evolution, so to speak, shaped and formed by the pressure of countless ancestral eyes that needed to know when they themselves were seen. And so the feeling persists, bridging the gap between our scientific age and all the ages that came before. We feel watched in empty rooms and crowded streets, in ancient forests and new-built houses, in the hour before sleep and the moment of waking. The sensation is the same now as it was for our grandparents and their grandparents before them, the same as it was for the first humans who huddled around their fires and felt the darkness pressing in. The candle has gone out now. The room is dark. But you are not alone. You never were. Something watches. Something has always watched. And in some sense you are that watching turned back upon itself, consciousness reflecting on its own mysterious nature. Let that be enough. Let that be the gift the feeling offers. Not fear, not paranoia, not superstition, but the quiet recognition that awareness permeates the world, that attention flows in currents we cannot always trace, that the feeling of being beheld is as natural as breathing, as ancient as the stars, as immediate as this very moment in which you read these final words. You are seen, you are known, you are watched, and somewhere, just beyond the edge of perception, something or someone is glad that you exist. May you sleep peacefully, carrying that knowledge with you into dreams.